Welcome, everyone, to Hunt the Habitat. A great dog and a shotgun will only get you so far in the uplands. In this podcast, Ann Jandernaw helps us to attain a more in-depth understanding of the birds we love to hunt, their habits, their habitat, and how those change through the year and through the hunting season. Hunt the habitat, find the birds. Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of Hunt the Habitat with Ann Jandernaw. My name is Steve Blazer, and Ann, we are pushing mid-November. How are you doing?
Good. It's my favorite time of year. That and springtime. I really like this time of year. It's quiet. The wolves were howling last night.
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier. They're a fact of life in the Northwoods. You've mentioned on earlier podcasts that they're everywhere up there.
A lot of people think that they're just only in certain areas. I know they're below Wausau, but you get north, they're going to be just about anywhere.
How close were they when they were howling at your place?
Well, they were off the property, but not that far. And it was a colder night. It wasn't too cold, but it was clear. And there was a group of them. And when you hear the coyotes, typically you won't hear coyotes if the wolves are in the area. So when you hear wolves, the coyotes aren't anywhere around. So I'll go a quick little detour here with a little story that one night I worked late, went to bed. It was close to midnight, right around then. And the puppies started making a racket. It was late summer. And I, of course, got up, yelled at them from upstairs, and everything was quiet. And I went back to sleep. And then they woke me up again. So I've got this spoon that it's a magic spoon. It's about 1.5 foot, steel, silver color. And all I got to do is wave it around or whack it on something. And everyone here just like, oh, we won't say one word. We're going to behave.
They know they pushed it too far when the spoon comes out.
Yes. All I got to do is pick it up. And it's like, well, shut up. The first pen, I have it so that the pups are not close to that first pen. Because if I'm going to whack something, I don't want a dog. They get obnoxious sometimes. And I've had enough. And especially at that night I had. So I come out in my pajamas, in my slippers, with a tiny little flashlight in my spoon. And I trudge over there, and I'm like, this is enough of this. You know, bang, 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 bang. You guys are being despicable. You have to go be quiet. And everyone, I show them the flashlight. No eyes are looking at me. They're all in the doghouses. Okay, good. Turn around. Start headed back, took about 10 steps, and all of a sudden a pack of wolves opened up. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. So, needless to say, that was a little too close. It wasn't on the property, but it was just off the property. Obviously, I didn't impress them because they were giving me feedback.
Well, they don't know about the spoon yet. That's the problem.
No.
You've got to pick up your training.
Well, I marched it back, me and my slippers, the spoon, and the small little flashlight, headed right back into the building, and I thought, that's it. Then I was with another friend, and we had a wolf cross the road, and a lot of times when they cross the road, if you can see, and it was a hardwoods area, he stopped. And I stopped, and I basically rolled down the window, and I started making the sound of a wounded rabbit. That got that wolf's interest. And it was interesting because I was watching him, and I would slowly creep ahead, and he was paralleling me I'm in the vehicle, okay, sounding like a rabbit that's really dying and can't seem to die, going down the road.
And the wolf is going, why? She's got a rabbit in that car. I'm hoping she throws it out the window.
Yeah. And he paralleled quite a while. And then he's finally like, what the heck? There's no rabbit here. He peels off and walks off. And I mean, the thing is, he obviously is not here. He just walked off. So I have a healthy respect for wolves. I've lost one husky pup a long time ago, different location. And at that time, Adrian Weidman came out and confirmed it as a kill. And the pup had gotten outside the fence during wintertime. And I actually thought someone had stolen the pup, but that's not the case. So I like seeing wolves. I don't care for them quite as much as most people might from down south as neighbors. Because I know there's people that think, oh, you have wolves. Oh, that's so wonderful. And I'm like, well, you better be doggone careful if you have wolves. But
yes and no, right?
yeah, I mean, there's good and bad, but I'm also very careful around it. And what's interesting is the wolves have always looked at the noise that comes from the kennel as like another pack. And they really don't push the boundaries. The coyotes push the boundaries, but the wolves don't. And when I had all my sled dogs, and that was a lot of sled dogs, that boundary was over half a mile out. Because you could see where if you took trails out from different areas that I would be going across country or seeing, I'd find at junctions of certain areas, you'd find the tracks, you'd find scat, but those tracks didn't go any farther. And so they figured I had a massive pack, other canine, because my huskies howled just like the wolves.
Okay.
All I could do is do a little short howl, and I could set the whole thing off. And then, once again, it wasn't a spoon; it was something else. I'd bang on something, and the whole place would stop. So it's just sometimes some noise at just the right time is enough to get your point across that, okay, we're not going to howl.
Everybody stay tuned for another podcast where Anne's going to talk about training dogs using kitchen utensils.
Skip keeps saying, he says, that's not a chapter in your book. And I'm like, no, and it's not going to be a chapter in the book on how to use spoons.
Well,
or
keep that for the slow
commands.
time, middle of January, and when things are a little slower, we're looking for things to talk about. It's going to be, today we're going to talk about training techniques with kitchen utensils. So.
That's when Anne's gotten exasperated with the dogs, and it's like, enough, I'm not getting my work done. And I'm not happy when I'm not getting my work done.
But today we've got some things to talk about here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about dog handling out in the field, and we're going to talk a little bit about later season strategies, kind of a building on what we did in the last podcast. But one of the things that you wanted to talk about today is time of day and hunting strategies, how they shift, especially tailored to the late season that we're getting into now, correct?
Yes.
How do things change?
Well, your whole season, instead of having, like, you'd be going out at 7:30 or something like that because it's warmer, instead you're going out a little bit later because you're waiting for the frost to come off. Night comes in sooner. So the whole daytime routine is shortened up for these birds. And when it's too cold, the birds don't move a lot. And that's when you're getting down in single digits. So you got to look at when it's starting to warm up. If it's sub-zero, many times they'll only feed once a day, and it's usually after lunch, sometime between 1 and 3. Look at when the weather is going to change. Like, we're recording this in the first week of November. Excuse me. And I'm looking at today's nice, so I know this evening would be good to go find some birds. And then tomorrow morning is going to be 20, so about the time it hits 27, 28, and it's going to be sunny. The next morning, there's mostly sunny skies. And when I'm looking at this is that like 7 a.m., it's still cloud and considered night. 8 a.m. is 21 degrees. And then when you see it jump about 4 degrees between 9 and 10, right around that 9, because there's a 8 a.m. is 21 degrees, 9 a.m. is 24. There's a 3 degree, but things are still going to be pretty crisp at that time. And the winds are not picking up. The winds are staying constant. I'm going to bet I'll find more birds at 9 than I would right at 8. there'll be a pattern there that they're going to probably come out around 8:45, feed to about 10:30, and then loaf. And then the afternoon, and they'll be in other areas and everything, but 4 p.m., the sun's sort of disappearing, so they'll typically feed just about an hour to an hour and a half before it's dark. There's a time there that the avian predators of the daylight are gone, but the predators of night typically aren't active yet. So there's a window right there. So right in there, 3:30 to a little after 5. And there's a little bit of a drop in temperature, but not much. And the humidity's starting to go up a little bit around 5. So I look at where my breaks are. So when I'm looking at, like, say, tonight's good, tomorrow's good, Sunday, rain, high of 43. But look at when the rain comes in. When I look at that, right now, Sunday, there's no rain coming in until about 11 a.m. it starts. And at that point, those birds are going to take care of everything between 8, 9, and 10. They'll feed right before the storm comes in. And then I look at the afternoon and I say, okay, is there a break in the afternoon? There's a slight break where it drops down to 24% from 38%. And then eventually at 6 p.m., it goes back up. So between 4 and 5, so probably 3:30 to 5:30, somewhere in there, that's when they're going to feed again. So I'm looking at the hourly forecast and when those breaks are going to happen. If you have 2 days in a row, think about it this way. Saturday hunting will be an important time because they're going to feed pretty good Saturday evening. They're going to feed, if they can, Sunday morning. And then they're talking Sunday afternoon rain, Monday a chance of rain, Monday night a chance of rain, and then Tuesday just cloudy. So Tuesday is going to be a key day for them to feed because they're talking about rain, possibly snow on Thursday. So you've got 5 days there where 4 of them are going to be rain or snow. So it's just a matter of 1 to 3 inches. I don't like that. So you'll have 1 to 3 inches on Wednesday, possibly, then Thursday. It's not going to stick around too much because the lows aren't really that cold. But then you'll have a nice break. So when I look at that, I've got rain coming in Sunday, rain Monday, Tuesday, nothing, feeding day, trying to catch up. They'll feed heavy that day. They'll be active. Then Wednesday, depending on when the rain comes in or the snow, Wednesday's going to be nasty. Thursday's going to be sort of off. Maybe Thursday evening they might be able to feed, and then there's like almost 6-7 days of really nice weather to hunt. So they'll feed heavy right after those storms. So they're going to be off their cycle. And sometimes what happens is when they have multiple days that they really can't feed much, and then they've got 1 day to feed and then 2 days that are bad weather again, the next couple days, they'll, after the last part of the timing of the bad weather, is the days after that, the first morning will be feed. The next morning, the timing might be off, and they may skip a morning meal because they'll feed so heavy. So they're out of their pattern. So that's what, and then everything's got to get settled down. That usually takes about 2 to 2.5 days.
Now, let's say, we're out for a hunt. We're up north. We're ready to hunt. If it is a sunny morning rather than a cloudy morning, are things going to get moving a little quicker?
It could, if it dries things off and, they can stay somewhat dry. Yeah, I think sunlight always helps any animal to feed more and move around more versus cloud, unless you're a hot summer and you're happy to have it cloudy.
Right, yeah. And I've got a question about when the birds go to the roads and get grit. I've heard different things said over the years. There's a time for you to walk the roads and let your dogs work the edges. And I'm talking about, at least in our area, forest roads. Typically, how does that fit into the feeding pattern? What's the time of day when, if you're going to try that, you should be considering it?
I find more success with that when a little bit earlier in the season, because right now the birds are basically in clumps in different areas. And when a bird wants grit during the regular season, they just go to the roads or go to trails or go to some place that has an open spot and some dirt with a little bit of gravel. But one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about is, well, everything's frozen. What do? That's where a lot of the buds come in, because when they eat the buds, they're frozen hard and it's like grit. And that helps them for digesting. Not only is it a food source, but it's also frozen. I think as far as the grit, I don't think we can just go and say, oh, they don't need it in the wintertime. They need something else to take its place.
Right.
And the birds, they can get to something that's loose and gravel, that's fine, but I don't see them in the wintertime along the logging roads or when things are just totally frozen trying to find a place to eat grit.
Okay. When things are not frozen, how does that work in terms of timing?
Well, it depends on what your weather pattern's been prior to it.
Okay.
If you've got a wet morning, then maybe once the sun comes out a little bit and things are drying off. And when you look at when you've had rain, look at the branches. And when the branches have all these droplets hanging from the branch and, you shake it and just about to get a shower, it's still too wet. But when there's only just a few droplets hanging off a little tiny branch coming off of a shrub or some sapling, and there's only a couple and you don't really get that wet, those birds will move. And so look at that. And the only dry place really is on the road. If they want to eat or pick up some clover or some other type of salad and get some grit, that's where it's at right there, is on some trail. And then they can flush back and away and go back into their denser cover. Because typically, if they try to go through the grass and slink through that, if it's too wet, they're just going to get soaking wet. Mm-hmm. That's why, you think about it, you can hunt these birds in a light mist, in a very, very light rain. But even that, sooner or later, comes to an end.
Okay.
They don't have a lot of oil in their feathers.
No, they don't. You've mentioned that in the past. Yeah.
The next bird you get, and if it's grassy, if you find a grassy place and it's heavy dew or rain or whatever, just wipe that bird through that grass and just watch everything stick together. It's really interesting because it really brings home to the fact how little oil they have in their feathers.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the other topics that we wanted to cover today was something that you and I chatted about a few days ago. And it gets into the realm, not so much of dog handling, but more hunter handling, how we handle ourselves out in the woods. And that's approaching a point. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we got to talking about it mostly because I started questioning some of my own practices, my own techniques. I am very fortunate this year in that I'm hunting a lot more this year because this is my first year retired. And my dogs are getting a whole lot more contact. And I'm seeing more birds actually pointed and held than I have in the past, just because, again, the dogs are just getting better. And I've kind of questioned a little bit how to approach a point. You hear a lot of things, okay? You hear, come in at a 45. You hear get within a certain range and stand still. I've heard people talk about you want to do a big circle, come back towards the dog. There's a lot of theories out there. And you and I started talking about that and thought it might be a good subject to kind of to bring up on one of the podcasts.
So much of it's your dog.
Mm-hmm.
how much experience the dog has, the cover, identifying the escape cover, and understanding a pattern. And if you start to understand a pattern, then you need to block yourself. Even if the dog's on point, I'll swing out and position myself somewhere closer to that cover. Because everything moves away from pressure in some way or another. When you approach a dog too fast, a lot of times they back up, especially if they're unsure of things.
Mm-hmm.
The bird hears you, it shifts. The bird hears the dog, it shifts. And if you understand that and you know where the escape cover is and where that bird wants to go, then you know more about where to position yourself. But then the other thing is how good is your dog's nose? How much is it telling you? Did you see the dog do a double back, which means he did that double back basically, what did you smell there? I don't understand what's going on here. And it's fleeting, and it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
This is how that first initial scent is. And the young dog, a lot of time, barely gives it a wink, so to speak. Whereas the older dog, the seasoned dog, right there, here's your sign, something's getting ready to happen. And as you're walking along, whether you're in the woods or on a trail or whatever, if you can see that, then you have a heads up that something's going on. And you see the dog do a double back. And so right then, when I was guiding, the dogs learned that when they did the double back, they stopped. Because then what that allowed me to do is to get clients into position. And I was reading the cover and trying to figure out which way was the bird wanting to go. Where's my trails? Where's my edge? Where it's going to be thick and gnarly and people won't be able to get through. Or do we have an edge close enough that can be blocked? And yes, some people like to go out to 45. When I was guiding, it was a 45. And I had different dogs then. I was guiding with LHU pointers and with the Ryman Hemlock and some old field trail lines and setters. And I found that the point, and I would release my dog and let it track and then try to position itself. It was sort of difficult, especially with a running bird. It's part of the reason I've switched to the lines that I have now, because they move with the scent so much. And it's hard. So I was also putting myself out there as a blocker many times, along with the client, to try to keep the bird from drifting down. And the slope is another thing. Reading your habitat ahead tells you basically where the bird wants to go. So you're trying to figure out that aspect, your dog, the intensity of the dog. Look at where the dog's looking. Look at and see if its eyes are starting to shift. Does it have that 1,000-mile stare on it? Like it's just like totally being fed that scent. So now you've got a really true line on it. And for me, I like to go out and around just a little bit, and then I have a command that I give my dog, which a lot of people use is okay, but I'll follow it up with easy. And then just something to just check their speed. So if they start to ramp up, I'll say maybe close, or I'll go just something that I've got communication, but I'm not loud in the woods. And once in a while, I'm surprised at how close the bird is, but I think a lot of it comes down to habitat, dog familiarity with working wild birds, and going out and around. Now, if you come up alongside of a young dog, many times that dog won't hold point. It'll break. And depending on the style of dog that you have, that dog's taught to just hold point and not move. Well, then you're going to be the one going out at the 45 or going out and around. And if you just stand still, sometimes they'll go up and sometimes they just freeze. And that's usually a bird that's not educated. Or sometimes they just quietly slink away and they just keep moving. And then they'll go so far and they'll stop again. If they find the habitat they're seeking to escape from, they typically don't stop. They just keep going into it and going deeper and deeper into the darker cover. But if that habitat's not close by, there'll be multiple stops. So it's like point, release, point, release, point, release 4 or 5 times. And by then you have a trajectory that you can sort of see what that bird's wanting. And you're looking ahead at the cover and you're shifting. And many times, it's like, okay, there's my tag alder edge, or there's this really dark cedar edge, and we're headed right for it. Well, there's your sign. You may want to figure out how far ahead that bird is. Now, so think about this. Pace off if you can from where the first point was to the next point. Pace it in your mind. Okay, 30, 40 steps, and you can sort of tell the distance. So now you know how far that bird's running. It's basically, and you'll be surprised. You're going to find a pattern there many times. Granted, you're going to have to weave in around trees and things like that.
Sure.
But as the bird becomes more educated, those distances will get longer a lot of times. And as the bird becomes more educated, they won't tolerate anything. They're like, goodbye, I'm out of here. But those same birds, if they're not getting pressured for a week or two, they sort of slump back a little bit and they won't be as edgy. Because when the birds come out of the hunting season, the main season, which is October, they're edgy. They're like, okay, we've had enough of this. And we're just going to go to the back of the cut, and you idiots can go to the front, that don't understand what's going on. And the smart ones are in the back because they're like, okay, I don't want to be where all this is at. It's just too much going on. So I'd sometimes go out and around, but a lot of my dogs will go out and around. And I literally get an opportunity to sort of see what the birds are doing. And it's amazing how these birds shift to pressure. But you got to think about this too. These birds are used to pressure typically coming at a straight line. How do we hunt? Typically a straight line. So if you think about it, if you change that, one of you at least changes it, the hunter or whatever, and if you teach your dog when you release it verbally, and I don't mean a tap on the head. I am not going to walk back through all what I just walked through to go tell the dog that you can release it by the tap on the head. Absolutely not. That's just a waste of time, and the bird's just going to keep moving. And I want that bird to pause. So I want it to be sort of confused what's going on, and then at some point be able to release my dog slowly enough that it goes into creep mode and cautious mode. And it needs to release being cautious, being respectful of the scent, not a bull in the china shop. And I understand young dogs many times are like that. But with experience on birds over time typically helps. But one of the things that people can do is, how do you release your dogs from the crate at the house? How do you release the dogs when they get out of the vehicle? How do you release the dogs when you let them out the back door? If they barrel out like they're on a full tilt run, what do you think you're going to do in the woods? Same thing. Not only as trainers and owners, we have to also teach patience. One of the biggest things that you can do wrong with a young dog is you get into birds, you shoot one, and you go chase down the rest, and you shoot another, and you shoot another. Eventually, all of a sudden, a lot of these dogs don't want to retrieve. Why? Because it's more fun to go to the next bird, the next bird, the next bird. Stop the hunt periodically. And if your dog is losing composure on birds, stop the hunt, go the other way, you know where the birds flew to, and go back and around and J-hook behind them and come in from a different direction. And just shut everything down, calm it down, get the composure back with the dog, settle the dog down, because a wild dog isn't going to settle very well, and it's not going to scent very well, and it's not going to handle the birds very well. And I think nowadays what we have for birds that we're working is we have birds that are running like pheasants, but in a lot more difficult cover. And dogs that can move with the bird and has respect for the bird and has cautiousness on the bird, and that you and that dog can work together with hardly saying anything, and you can hunt quiet, is worth a lot. And I know I'm probably making it sound like some idyllic picture out there, but it is being a team together, and it is working together. At least for me, I want to be able to slip through the woods, be as quiet as possible. Sometimes you can't because the leaves are too dry or something like that. But I love it when you've worked a bird for quite a while and the dog just has kept its composure. It's not unraveling. And that's hard. And so many times, too, the other thing is the expectation with the dog is that not all scent is going to produce a bird. So even when you have a young dog, sometimes it's great to have scent out there, but there's no bird. That's got to be a part of the training as well. You have to teach patience because you're asking a dog to play a different game than what the dogs played 15 years ago when there were a lot of birds.
Now, couple of questions. I'm going to take you back a little bit here, okay? Mm-hmm. First off, I want to talk about pace. You have alluded to this a little bit, but not in detail. All right, so dogs on point. And dogs, our GPS tells us the dog is, let's just say 60 yards away. That's not an unreasonable distance, okay? You know the dog's on point. How fast are you trying to slip through the woods as quietly as possible to get to the point? Are you trying to get there as quickly as possible? What's your attitude as you get to within visual distance of the dog?
I'd have to be getting there pretty quick, as quiet as possible, and trying to read the cover as fast as I can. And so you better have an idea when you look at a cut and you look, say, at our maps, what's the edge of that cut? What's along that edge of that cut? So that you know, okay, is the dog on point facing the tag alders and is half a flush away for a grouse, which means it could easily run into it. Do I have time? And if it's doing that, without seeing where the dog is, I don't know which side to really approach it because I don't see the intensity of the point, the direction and all that, or even have a trajectory to go off of from where I've had point after point. Now, if it's farther away from the cover it's seeking, get to where the dog is, and then you have a chance to relocate multiple times, then I have a trajectory of what's going on. And you also have to be aware you could be working 2 or 3 birds at the same time. And eventually something's going to split off from the dog. But it's always what's ahead of that dog on that point and how far is the distance from where the birds are going to try to peel off. If you know you're on the edge, I mean, it's hard because if that dog's working so close to the edge where the birds are going to peel off, they're already gone 9 times out of 10. It's already into the thick cover, and many times you can't get in and try to get the bird. So a lot of it is the cover and where the dog is into the cover and how close it is to where the dogs are going to basically, and you'll get there and there won't be another relocate, because if you have a bird that's been very well educated, it'll run after the 3rd or 4th, depending on the moisture content in the weeds and what's around it, it'll wash its scent. And they will run to where it's just about impossible to pick it up until they stop and stay in one place for a while. It takes multiple relocating to get to that point.
Okay. And again, this is a little bit of a review of something you said earlier. I want to pick at it a little bit. All right. We've walked up on the dog. We've got a visual on the dog. Okay. We're inside of, again, depending upon the cover, we're inside of 25 yards. We're inside of 30 yards. All right. We've got to make a decision now as to what to do. we're off to a side. We're not coming up directly from the dog's rear. Okay. Most of the time we're coming in from one side or another. And are we going to do the big J hook around the dog, or are we going to try to come in at a 45? And what will dictate that approach? And I guess the thing that I really want to hear is, what's the distance? If we're going to do that J hook, how far away, or how big a hook are we doing? Is it 30 yards? Is it 40 yards? Is it 50 yards? I know it's cover dependent too, but take us through your thought process on that.
Well, you have to remember, I was basically getting to see the double back. I got to see the multiple points. And then I'm seeing all of a sudden that we're running out of cover that I know is workable.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I always will slide to the lower side, not the upper side, because typically these birds want to go down unless there's a clump of pines to the right. Which I'm saying my upper side would be on the right and the low side would be going to the left of the dog at sort of like a 45. So if the dog is pointing at an angle, sort of like a head, then eventually the trajectory would sooner or later hit, like, say, a cedar swamp. And if it's sort of between pointing at that and a little bit like it's still going to be on the edge of the cut, I would not come from the top and go out and around the right, because I'm going to push that bird down. I would come from the left side, which the lower side would get me to the lower side quicker, and try to shift the bird a little bit with my presence, and I'd go right down to where the edge is, where I could still sort of see that dog, and then basically do a release command and then let the dog work and start to see how the dog is tracking. Did it all of a sudden do a hard left, and is it going to cut in behind me, meaning that the bird already went straight for the cover? Or is it going to angle out in front of me I have the low side on my left, the dog's coming at the right and right-hand side, and it's like the bird's just sort of starting to parallel that lowland area but hasn't dived into it. I'm going to do that, and as the dog gets just about even with me, just before it gets even to me, I'm actually working a little bit ahead of it and paralleling it at almost a 45 as the dog is moving. And then it stops. And then at that point, when it stops, I'm going to assess the cover again. Is there pines or whatever? And what can that bird hold off in and not be seen? It's held in this one area. And so I look for any obstructions, a log, a pine, a couple pines, a windblown area, where a bunch of tops fell. Anything in there, or is it just open other than the floor, a few hazelbrush and things like that? If the dog's pointing and there's a hazelbrush patch, I'll get on the backside of it if it's not too big of a patch, where I can still sort of see the dog. But I got to be careful to protect that bottom side. I'd rather see the bird go up the hill than down the hill.
Sure.
So I don't know if that answered it. It's hard doing visuals just talking about it.
It kind of does. And it's just understanding the thought process. I think so many of us, dogs on point, and almost all of us know that we don't want to walk right up the dog's rear end. Okay.
No.
But we kind of walk in, we'll pick a hypothetical spot about 30 yards in front of the bird or the dog and kind of walk in at a 45. I know I've seen that numerous times, and I'm kind of in that habit a little bit. And again, you're thinking cover, you're thinking terrain, you're thinking
slope. Okay.
You're thinking slope. You're looking ahead at where the bird is going. It's important to hear your thought process on this.
I realize I hunt possibly different than some people, but everyone's got their own style and what they want. I used to go through the woods a lot faster. It's not that I'm that much older anymore, but it's called torn meniscus.
Okay. That'll do it.
Well, in both knees. And so I'm trying to be a little bit on the careful side.
Okay.
So, but a lot of people hunt a lot in the snow. I don't anymore because I can't see where I'm putting my foot down, into a hole. And
Right.
you wrench one and you're in big trouble. And I've already had surgery on one knee. So I'm not totally fair weather hunter, but I'm not going to go out in 6 to 8 inches of snow because that's a recipe for me to be sitting around with my leg healing up from surgery.
Well, you just created, we're kind of getting to the end of our podcast here, but you created a fabulous segue into just something to build on from the last podcast when you talked about late season strategies. And one of the things we wanted to talk about briefly today was early December. And we brushed on it in the last podcast. Okay. But again, now we're colder. We might have a little bit of snow on the ground. How do you think about things differently as we get, many of us are going to shut down in about a week and a half because deer hunting is going to start.
Right.
Okay. But roughly December 1, okay, the seasons are over. There's still muzzleloader hunters out there in most cases, but the main rifle deer season is over and we start to get back out in the woods. Those of us that choose to get out there in December. Talk a little bit again. Review for us a little bit what the strategy is as we get past the deer season into early December.
I would say basically I spot hunt. I have actual spots that I want to go to when I look at a map, even if it's a new area. And I know that my time's going to be probably more closer to 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And those birds are going to feed between 9 and 11 possibly. And they'll sort of shut down and loaf, and then they're going to start feeding again around 3, something of that nature, maybe 2. But I don't spend time traversing the whole woods. I have specific areas that I'm going to in the woods where I think there's food source, I think there's cover nearby, and I'm going to that spot, and then I'm trying this one and this one and this one. And of course, the dog is casting as you go, and I'm looking for tracks. I'm looking for hazelbrush patches. I'm looking for ironwood, and I'm looking for clumps of pines. But I would say your weather is going to dictate, and especially your temperatures, on how much these birds move. And there's a little bit of wind, you're going to be down low. They need to be down low is what they need to be. They want that wind to go over the top of them. So those are things that I typically am not hunting at all up higher, from at least where I'm at and what's available. I'm hitting places on lower edges, not right on them, but very near it, to cast and to try to find where would the birds want to go if it was nasty. Where is a stopover place? Okay, we come out of the low area, we run through some hazelbrush, we find a group of pines, we go out and we feed a little bit, and in one flush, if the bird was budding up in a tree, can it sail all the way back to the thick cover again? So when you think about it, it's not a huge flush, but it's really one good flush is how far they're away from what they call home when there's a storm.
Okay. And the most important factor, I think, that we talked about in the last podcast is the conifers.
Mm-hmm. Right. And conifers are important. They're the key for them.
Okay. There's not enough snow yet to snow roost. They need a warm, safe place to find shelter.
Right. And that's important because without it, one, they're just going to burn their fat and there won't be anything left because they have to eat a tremendous amount of nutrient-rich food to keep the weight where it needs to be and to keep the fat up. And that's why the snow is so important. When they don't have snow, the best thing for them to do is to get out of the wind and stay as comfortable as possible.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, we covered a lot of neat stuff here today. Thank you. I wanted to let you know, though, I did do a little Googling. I have not found anything yet, any of the specifics or the timetable for Wisconsin's introduction of elephants. I want you to know that.
I knew you were going to mention the damn elephants.
and those of you that are listening, if you didn't hear the last podcast, we're not helping you out at all. You're going to have to listen to the last podcast. It's an exciting thing. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah, and elephants.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's going to be an open season on them, but it'll be fun to see. Yeah.
My God. Elephants. Yes, the elements with the elephants.
So, yeah.
Well, we try to keep it interesting.
We did too. All right. And as always, thank you very much. And everybody, always remember to hunt the habitat. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Steve. You take care and don't get stepped on by an elephant.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.